Welcome everyone joining us today, both in our live session and Albert Anamfiu, and I'm the Masterclass coordinator for the Anijie Global Foundation. For those new to us, Anijie Global Foundation is a youth-led non-profit organization empowering women and youth through educational and leadership development programs. Our mission is to drive positive community impact and contribute to global progress. Today's session is part of our Anijie Masterclass series, a monthly online learning initiative bringing together global change makers, industry leaders, and emerging talents to shape the next generation of African leadership. Through these interactive sessions, we bridge the gap between aspiration and achievement, theory and practice, challenges and solutions. Today, I'm honored to introduce our distinguished speaker today, who goes by the name Mr. Godwin Doe. So Mr. Godwin Doe is a development practitioner and consultant with extensive experience across youth development, environmental sustainability, and public policy. He is a delegate with the Young Diplomats of Ghana, engaging in high-level discussions on foreign policy and international relations. He bridges the gap between policy and grassroots implementation with a focus on climate action and social equity. He has worked with multiple UN agencies, including UNFPA, UNESCO, UNAIDS, UNDP, and UN Habitat. He's a leader in prominent youth-focused NGOs in Ghana, including Youth Action Movement and Youth Reporters for the Environment. So rest assured, today's session promises to be very exciting and educative. Yes. So those who just joined us, thank you for joining in. We invite our audience to submit questions through the Q&A feature, which we will address after the presentation. Without further delay, I'll hand over to Mr. Godwin Doe. Please, you have the floor.
All right. Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm extremely excited to be here just to share a little bit of the experience I've had by far as a young diplomat or a budding diplomat. And I'd like to say a very big thank you to everyone who has joined and those yet about to join. And I'll just say, kindly join me on this ride to just have a brief presentation. I expect this presentation to be as interactive as possible because whatever we're going to be discussing here is going to be youth-centered, youth-focused, and it will require a lot of back and forth with questions and answers to make us digest and have a deeper dive into what international relations, global cooperation, policy making, and also youth participation should be like to also push the agenda of development, not just from the Ghanaian and African side, but how we can feed into global cooperations or global conventions. So today, I'm speaking about the critical role of international cooperation, policy making, and youth participation in shaping our future. And we'll explore why collaboration across borders and generations is essential for progress. So as we proceed, wherever you feel there should be a question, just drop it in the Q&A feature. When we are done with the presentation, we'll be able to have a deeper dive into a discussion. So I would like to state that we live in a world that is deeply interconnected, highly complex, that we need complex solutions to these complex problems. Global challenges like climate change, global politics or international or trade wars, pandemics such as COVID-19 and inequalities across national borders, where no country can solve the problems alone. For example, Ghana cannot say they are solving COVID-19 alone. Ghana cannot say they are going to mediate peace between Ukraine and Russia. It takes a global approach. It takes countries who are member states of a world body like the United Nations to come together and decide how they would like to address these issues. And no man is an island in the world because the world is highly interconnected. And what we need to understand is that we as young people are the largest generation in history. And stepping into leadership roles, shaping these solutions are very, very much paramount because Africa, as a classical example, is made up of young people. And if we aspire to have a very good demographic divide or demographic dividend, sorry, we will need to equip young people with all the leadership skills they need, with all the information, and how to also integrate them into our developmental agenda. So I'd like to highlight on the importance of international cooperation since it's one of the areas of discussion tonight. And international cooperation is not luxury, I must say. It is a bare necessity because working together as an entity requires countries to build peace, improve global health, and also tackle shared challenges. As I stated earlier on, the United Nations is one body that enhances international cooperation with specialized agencies, including the World Health Organization, UNDP, UNAIDS, UNOWAS, and all other agencies. I'm highlighting this because of the kind of engagements I've had with them as what happened in the past, as in working as a volunteer, a consultant, a youth leaders fellow, and also a support staff. So I really understand how some of these international corporations or world bodies work. So what I would like to highlight is that under the line of action regarding climate change, where I do a lot of work, we have a cooperation or an agreement where all world bodies, including countries that are member states of the United Nations, have signed on, which is the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, where countries are all contributing to this agreement because they have made commitments to it. And Ghana is contributing to this agreement through the NDCs, that is the nationally determined contributions. So under these NDCs, we've outlined a couple of strategies, a couple of markets and indicators to meet that will also feed into this international cooperation. And I would like to take a case study such as COVID-19. So COVID-19 has improved power and fragility of global corporations. So with this whole COVID issue, it shows how the world is interdependent. I mean, our country as Ghana is also it's also depending on other countries in form of aid, in form of support, in form of technical know-how. Because Ghana alone, I don't think we can have that force majeure to combat or to fight against climate change or COVID-19. So the whole thing has to do with programs and projects or initiatives that were led by the World Health Organization. And it has also proven that coordinated action could deliver vaccines worldwide. So, but inequalities we saw reminded us that global solidarity must be strengthened for future crises. So you realize that other people were having a higher hit of COVID-19 as compared to others because one, they were able to build resilience in their healthcare system. So yes, we have the World Health Organization, but we cannot fully or we cannot diligently execute this because um, our fingers are not equal. We cannot have equality being served on a silver platter because it takes a lot. Health wise or infrastructure wise, technical know how wise, we're not on the same levels. So I'll dive into a perspective of policy making and how that can drive global progress. And I'd like to state that international cooperation needs structure, and the structure comes in a form of policy making because once you have a policy in line, it sets the tone or it sets the rule for how nations will work together. It tells you when to engage, it tells you when not to engage, it tells you how to trade, it tells you how to resolve conflict or how human rights could possibly be protected. And I'm saying this because sustainable development is a blueprint for global solidarity, and the Agenda 2030 is one we cannot do without. And this sustainable development goal spells out how national policies should be carved to feed into global agendas, global perspective and directions. If Ghana is not signed on to the SDGs, I don't think we can have strengthened healthcare. We can have a good action for climate change. We can have a good action for justice. all these things come into play, and it's highly interconnected. And I have to state that the 17 goals we see as part of the SDGs are highly dependent on each other. When we talk about poverty, we need healthy people. So good health has to be met in order to work to reduce poverty. When we talk about the quality of education, when people are not healthy, how can they have quality education? And the segment on education that has to be highlighted in this sense because sexual reproductive health is also very much important. When girls do not understand their sexual reproductive health and they get pregnant, how can they go to school? How can we attain gender equality? And all these phases of SDGs are highly dependent. That is why I say global solidarity is much important and it needs structure. That is when policy making comes in, and young people cannot be left out of this discussion. So, without much ado, I would like to give an oversight of what policing is and how it looks, or what the outlook of global policy on the international front. So, international policies are not just created overnight, it takes a lot of processes. And one thing I would like to say is that if you don't identify an issue, you can never negotiate amongst yourself as to how you want to address the issue. So, one point of call for global policy making is that problems have to be identified. For example, if COVID-19 has hit the globe, that is a problem. Nations will have to come together and negotiate from their various perspectives how it's hitting, what are the indigenous ways they feel could be used to address these problems and why it should be addressed. And then we can now move into the creating of treaties or agreements. So the Paris Agreement, for example, is one big thing that is set aside to tackle the issue of climate change. And you find out that when it comes to the Conference of Parties, the COPs, a lot of countries need to produce their experts or present experts to negotiate on some of these international treaties or agreements. So after this is all agreed on, and we have the countries signing on onto these agreements, they now go into the implementation phase where they get to bring out projects and programs for young people to also participate in. And I know in Ghana, when it comes to the issues of climate change, we have the environmental protection agencies and other CSOs working together around that. And you'll find out that CSOs or NGOs are also meeting the NDC's targets, where it's going to help in reporting to the global landscape what Ghana is doing. And I'm very much excited about this because climate change is a very big jargon. And if we don't have it demystified into a local context for us as young people to participate in, we will not be able to contribute to the global discourse. So I think diplomacy, to a larger extent, is very much needed. And as I stated earlier, it's not a luxury. It is much important in whatever we are doing. So when we look at the implementation of these projects, we have to monitor, because if you don't monitor your progress, you cannot know where to adjust and where not to adjust, where to put in more resources or where to slow down on resource utilization. So I would like to see that diplomacy do not compromise on some of these things. It's a long-term vision that drives processes. So people feel like, oh, you need to belong to a particular class to be a diplomat. No, it starts from somewhere. And if you really want to be participating in global discourses, you need to start from the grassroots to understand the context at which you are working and also where you really want to go so that you grow together through the process. So I must say that young people are indeed a powerful voice in the world of diplomacy. With half of the world's population under 30 years, young people are bridging innovations, are bringing out the urgent steps, and also helping with global perspectives. And I can highlight a couple of young people I know. I know of Joshua Payne, who is currently the CYC, that's the Commonwealth Youth Council chairperson. I know of Nino Kofi Omabo, who is also doing something good in the climate change space. I know quite a number of people, not to spell out all, but I know that a lot of young people are out there putting Ghana on the map. And I believe other African countries are also having young people shaping, global discourses. And what fascinates me most about youth participation at the global level is that young people are deserving of all they do. young people are given a voice, but I just feel like there's more room for improvement because global discourses is not just about youth representation, it's about meaningful youth participation. And I think you and I, as as a holistic caucus, as young people, will understand that young people are not just people to be used for certain agendas, but they have to be part of the process. And that is what I would like to highlight at this point. Um, not to cut things short. I would like to state that whatever we do today has consequences, and we really need to remain committed to what we are doing. It only takes the passionate person to be out there to do what he's supposed to do, and it takes passionate people to drive agendas. So concrete youth action includes having formal youth advisory board. And I know that Anijie Foundation will have an advisory body where that will feed into international cooperation. And when international cooperations and smart policies are being put in place, young people are empowered. Leadership comes at the forefront of issues, and real progress happens. So I'll just like to call a shot here by saying that the future of global affairs is not just a matter of government or institutions. It takes you and I as young people to participate. So I think I'll end here and take questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Godwin Doe. So if you have any question, we'll be using the Q&A feature. So you can just enter your question at the Q&A section. And Mr. Godwin Doe will attend to it. Okay, so I would like to ask Mr. Doe, what was the defining moment that drew you to global affairs, like as a youth coming up? What drew you to diplomacy and global affairs?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. For me, I started as a volunteer with a community youth group called the Youth Action Movement. Right, it's a subsidiary or a youth wing of the Planned Parenthood Association of Ghana. So I grew up in the northern part of Ghana, Tamale to be precise, and in Tamale, a woman that doesn't have a say, she never has a say in a home discourse. The woman can never take a decision on behalf of the family. In Tamale, issues around teenage pregnancy was common and normal. In Tamale, issues around gender-based violence were very common. So growing up, I used to see firsthand the effects of these things, and I started with a movement. So that is where Youth Action Movement came into the picture. So just a community of 4 or 5 guys and a few ladies. We go around to educate people on gender-based violence, why it's not good, why it's not really helping, and why we need to have a balance equality to aid in community development. So that is how the whole thing began. And I joined Youth Action Movement because Youth Action Movement was one of the surest way to get resources, to get flyers, to get some money to organize programs. So as I started with this, and I never knew I'll end up in global affairs. So fast forward, when I came to the University of Ghana after senior high school, um, I joined the branch in Legon, and I kept volunteering. So through that first year, second year, I became a chairperson for the branch, and then I was like, I need to devise a project. But I realized that in level 100, you go for medicals. And when you go for medicals, you have all your information with the hospital, university hospital. So a lot of young people didn't find it a safe space to go and talk about their sexuality or issues affecting them, such as the use of condom, rape, issues around STI and STDs. They don't want to go test. So I designed a project called Legon Goes Red. And when I designed Legon Goes Red, I didn't know the global implications until I became an intern with the United Nations Population Fund, UNFP. And one time I was working with the Adolescent and Youth Development Unit, and I realized that the UNFP has a core fund to provide SRH, that's sexual reproductive health information and services to young people. And the number of young people that they were targeting were like about 20,000 young people. So I was like, the Gongo Shade was a project I did last year for the University of Ghana branch. And I when I did the project, I had about 500 students participating, and over 300 were given information and services, and 200 just came for just information. So I was like, these numbers I'm seeing can actually feed into the UNFPA's fund they have. So how can I contribute to this goal? So I wrote a proposal, tailored it to the whole fund from UNFPA, submitted it, had a lot of back and forth. It wasn't easy, I must say, because getting support for such a big program without having a lot of track record, just one track record, was something that raised eyebrows. So I had a meeting with one of the program officers, Anijie, who I'm ever grateful for because she's been very, very much instrumental in this. And I received the support, I received the funding for this project. So this time around, I just didn't do it Legon Go Straight, but I brought in um, other activities that will bait students to come participate and have themselves tested for HIV and AIDS, to have themselves tested for STI and STDs, and also to get the right information so that they can make the right choices. Because a lot of people are having sex on campus, but there's something they don't talk about because they feel it's not a safe space to talk about that. So I started with eye testing. I started with BMI index, blood bank coming to take blood. So it was like a blood donation drive with some of these other things on the side. So funny enough, when we finished with the entire program with support from UNFPA to get our canopies, our sound system and everything, we had over 1,500 students coming in for this. And that fed into UNFPA's numbers because they need to report to the donors that this is what they've been able to do. And that was when I realized that whatever action you are taking at the grassroots level is linked with the global agenda. And if we are not able to make it understandable for young people, they will not be able to know how to participate. That is how come sometimes NGOs having projects feeding into some of these international treaties is very much important. You end up participating without knowing you're actually participating, and you're actually shaping the global discourse. So that is how the whole journey began. I didn't really get my on the silver platter because I had to go through a process to really understand some of these things. I hope I've answered your questions.
Yes, please, you have. There are a few questions in the Q&A section, and I would like to read the first one from an anonymous attendee. It goes, how does one get into diplomacy to be a diplomat? And are there stages?
Okay, that's a good question. So diplomacy comes in two folds, right? We have the career diplomats and we have the political diplomats. Per the Ghanaian standards of okay, I think that also fits international standards. You can be a career diplomat where you work with the Ghana Foreign Service, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they have officers in three folds. They have the A officer, the B officer, the C officer, right? The A officer basically has to do with someone coming into the foreign service with a degree. The B officer has to do with someone who has a diploma. And then the C officer is someone who is coming into the foreign service with a senior high school certificate, right? And the C officers are regarded as menial workers. The B officers normally occupy secretarial positions, and the A officers are like actual officers. And you go to the foreign with your first degree, or second degree, whichever degree. Once you're entering the foreign service, once you have a degree, whether it's a master's or undergrad, you are going in as an A5 officer. And with the A5 officer, you have to pursue a mandatory master's degree at LESIAD. So after that LESIAD, you now have other short courses to do before you can now become an A4 officer. From that A4 position, that is when you can now go into postings. They can post you to another country to work. They can post you to a duty station, a mission. So after you go and come back after 4 years, you can now become an A3 officer, pursue other courses, and then go back on posting. So the A2 officers are like the assistant directors of the foreign affairs ministries, in charge of protocol, in charge of bilateral, multilateral. There are different facets in that, which I don't really want to go into because of time. And then we have the A1 officer who becomes a director, who is also due for an ambassadorial position. So through all these rankings, the same thing applies for the B officers and the C officers. But a B officer in the foreign affairs cannot become an A officer, because when you get into as a B officer, you have to rise through to B1 before you can now come and start with A5 again, which is a whole lot of years. And if you go as an A officer, you would spend approximately 15 to 18 years to become an A1 officer. So by then, if let's say you go at the age of 30, by the age of 45, 48, that is where you can be due for an ambassadorial position. On the other side, to become a political diplomat is when maybe someone becomes a president and decides to appoint you as an ambassador to another country, right? And that one is short-lived, because after the president leaves and you're done serving your term, you don't get to come to the foreign ministry. You're out because you're a politician. So you go sit home, or if your president is still in power, he still puts you somewhere else. That is fine. And also on the UN level, on the UN level, UN level diplomacy is quite different from what I just said about the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. On the UN level, we have different rankings, right? The D roles are for the directors, the director generals, who can be due for other higher positions. The P is for the country representatives and the deputy country representatives. The G officers are the general staffs. And then we have the intern roles, that's the I officers, right? So these are the various ranks in diplomacy. And before you can get into the foreign service, that's for the Ghanaian Foreign Affairs Ministry, you have to apply, write some exams and some interviews. But with the UN, there are several ways of getting into the UN. You can apply directly for roles in the UN system. You can go to the UNV portal, that's unv.org, where they have different roles you can apply for based on your qualification. And also, you can also start through volunteering. I got into the UN by volunteering with youth-based organizations that were working in line with some of the agencies in the UN. So if PPAG is working with the UN, maybe they are trying to end gender-based violence and improve meaningful youth participation. So I became a volunteer, and when I was volunteering with the UN, I became an intern through that opportunity. And I started growing from there. That is how come I occupied several portfolios within the UN. So I think I'll end here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that was very elaborative.
Yeah.
Also, there's a question here about some of the initiatives or projects you've been involved in terms of diplomacy, and what advice you can give to someone who has only a degree but would like to get into diplomacy and does not know where to start from.
Oh, okay. That's a
So
great
the
question.
first being some initiatives or projects you've been involved in terms of diplomacy,
Diplomacy.
advice to give someone who has only a
Mhm.
degree and would like to get into diplomacy. Thank you.
All right. So there's been a lot of diplomatic programs or projects I've embarked in, I've actually participated in, right? And one that really comes to mind was the Ghana Youth Meeting, to back International Youth Day, where the Young Diplomats of Ghana, which I'm a member of, or which I'm a delegate with, was supposed to draft youth perspective on certain critical issues in country context that will feed into the UN General Assembly, right? So that was one project, because we had to develop a report to see how young people really understand some of the national issues that has global lenses. And another one too was through participating in the Model United Nations in Harvard, right? Yes, in Harvard, there are several things that goes on in the Model UN system. And some of these things feed into real-time diplomacy because you get to embark on ambassadorial visits. And I must say that the Young Diplomats of Ghana program is one way of getting into diplomacy or participating in an area of diplomacy to really find your feet and know where you really want to specialize in diplomacy because it's quite broad. Because under diplomacy we have bilateralism, that is one-on-one, like between Ghana and Nigeria, Ghana and the United States. That's bilateral relations. We have the multilateral perspective to diplomacy that has to do with international corporations like the UN, the Commonwealth, some of these global bodies. And we have the conference diplomacy that has to do with these agreements we have, like the Paris Agreement on climate change. The WHO also has an agreement to combat pandemics. So all these agencies have a conference outlook where conference diplomacy is being applied. So and when I was also a fellow with the UNFPA, I had to attend the Fifth African Youth SDG Summit, where the West and Central Africa of Africa, the African continent, had a commitment to see how young people can be amplified. The voice of young people can be amplified, both country context and regional context. So I had to attend the summit to deliver a position paper. And the position paper is just like Ghana's lens or Ghana's perspective or Ghana's report on how young people are participating meaningfully in national decision making that is feeding into the global discourse. So I've actually participated in a lot of programs or projects in line with diplomacy, but a few I can remember is what I've just highlighted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also, there is a question here about how the youth can influence global policy decisions meaningfully.
Oh yeah, so yes, there's a lot of ways young people can actually influence policy, right? It's not just about going on the road to make sure they repair an LI against illegal mining, right? It's not just about making all the noise. It's not all about the Twitter advocacy and activism, right? Yes, advocacy and activism is one of the surest ways to influence policy. But if you strategically position yourself with a youth-based organization that is contributing to some of policy making, or let's say a youth organization that is kind of in line with certain national policies, you can influence policy making. So, for example, when I was with the Young Reporters for the Environment, we are like, it's just like the young people's voice that contributes to EPA's mandates, right? And the other NGOs like the Strategic Youth Network for Development, SYND, we have 350 Ghana reducing our carbon. If you participate in some of these projects, you end up influencing policies, not just by advocacy and activism, but helping in policy documents preparation. You end up writing policy briefs. You end up putting together, let's say, a policy framework on how young people can also participate meaningfully. So I'll just have to circle back to my point that you need to volunteer. You need to put yourself out there. You need to read wide and see how you can also share perspectives. Maybe just writing on your blog and sharing on social media will influence someone's idea about maybe having you on board on some of their projects. So I might just say there are several ways of doing that, and one surest way is to volunteer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there are a few more questions the QA section, but I'd like to personally ask this question. That's
Yes, I'm here.
oh, sorry, this thing. Okay, I would like to ask what role does what partnerships, have helped scale your diplomatic efforts? What partnerships have
On a
helped?
personal level.
Yes, please.
Oh, partnerships. Okay, so as I said earlier on, for the global discourse, partnerships is something you cannot do away with, right? And if, let's say, as I stated earlier on, I was a branch chair for the University of Ghana Youth Action Movement branch. I had to partner with other youth-based organizations. To help with volunteering, to help with publicity, to help bring people on board, right? And working in silos can never solve a problem because some of the problems you seek to solve are highly interconnected and interdependent on each other. So when I was on campus as Youth Action Movement, the University of Ghana Medical Student Association was one I couldn't do away with because it was a health focused advocacy I was doing, or a health focused project I was doing. I couldn't do away with even the University of Ghana clinic itself. I couldn't do away with partnering with the National Blood Bank. So you see, there are several ways of partnerships, and they can come in the form of cash, in the form of technical support or technical know-how. They can come in the form of just someone coming to volunteer. It's a way of partnering with people. So with partnership, yes, it's broad and it's something you can never do away in the world of diplomacy because you need to collaborate with people to set agendas. You need to collaborate with people to implement your projects, and you need the collaboration to execute it and also report properly. And if you can't partner with people, you can't have a caucus. For example, if you go into the UN General Assembly and you want to drive an agenda that represents a particular region and there's no unity amongst you, you're not partnering to make things work, then you can't drive the agenda at the end of the day. So you really need partnership in whatever you do in the world of diplomacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then we can continue with the questions in the Q&A section. The next one is, what role does intersectionality play in international development?
So intersectionality plays a very big role, just like the Venn diagram, right? Without an intersection, you can never know what the two sides are doing. So it's just like when there's a conflict and there's no mediator, how can you solve problems, right? So in diplomacy, intersectionality is very much important because that's the center of attraction. That is where the center holds. So if there's no intersectionality, you cannot have a caucus. There's no intersectionality, you cannot have a discourse. And if there's no intersectionality, you cannot have a room for mediation because when there's conflict, you need mediation. And if they don't have a level playing ground or a point where two countries meet in the form of resource or in the form of agenda, then they can't push it. Just look at the US, for example, and their outlook on the global scale, right? Whoever thought the US would support Russia on certain things? Because there's an interest there. So where there's a common form of interest, that is where there's an intersection. And it plays a very big role in driving the global discourse and agenda. Thank you.
Thank you too. There is also a question here that, please, I'd like to know how NGOs can contribute to diplomacy.
Okay, so NGOs they do not contribute directly to diplomacy. What they do is that they support in their deliverables. So, for example, if Anijie Foundation is looking out to support the youth base for meaningful youth participation in maybe national discourses, yes, which is something I believe is actually happening. What I'm doing right now is meaningful youth participation because we are digesting the issues around diplomacy for you to understand and see how you can also participate for the global discourse. So the role is quite enormous. There are several ways of playing that role. And I believe that Anijie Foundation is not just into youth participation and development. I see they do a couple of things on climate change. And as I stated earlier on, we have the Paris Agreement, which is a global agenda or agreement. We have the NDCs. And one section of the NDCs is that we should we should create a space where young people can talk about some of these issues affecting climate change in their own local ways and how they can participate in it. So if Anijie Foundation is embarking on a tree planting exercise to reduce our carbon footprint, because some of these trees we say about carbon sinks, they are contributing to global solidarity, or they are also contributing to diplomacy in a way, because at the end of the day, when Ghana is going to negotiate on climate change, they take some of these parameters or reports from these NGOs to make a very comprehensive report. So it's not so direct in most cases, but NGOs do play a very important role in diplomacy.
That is awesome. Also, there's a question here about key leadership lessons from your journey in global relations and diplomacy so far.
Oh, the lessons are a lot, right? There are a lot of lessons to be learned because you can, in the world of diplomacy, values do matter, and leadership is mostly centered around integrity and influence, right? So if you are dealing with two or more people, you have to be tactical, and that is what diplomacy stands for, the tact. And I learned some of these things the very hard way because if you are not able to be tactical in your negotiations, you can never have things come for you. For example, when I was dealing with UNFPA to get the funding for some of my projects, it was a lot of tact because I had to convince them. You have to tell that compelling story. If you're not able to convince them, you might have a very brilliant case, but the part of storytelling to convince them that, oh, you are capable of managing your own affairs, you are capable of managing people and influencing people, and you are capable of managing the little money they give to you with so much trust and integrity. So, I mean, leadership is very important, and values are very paramount in whatever you do as a diplomat. Thank you.
You to Okay, there's another question here. Can you please share any case studies or successful youth-led diplomacy initiatives?
Kindly come again.
Okay. Can you please share any case studies or successful youth-led diplomacy initiatives?
Oh, yes, there are a lot. And from the African outlook or from the global landscape, I hope you guys know Greta Thunberg, right? Greta Thunberg is a case study we need to analyze
Yes,
in
please.
this call. Let me think through and give another case study. I'm thinking of a country context case study. Um, okay, so let me just start this way. Ghana, we all know, is not a common floor member when it comes to international cooperation. Ghana is like it's there, right? And if we look at global south, Ghana is also a member of the global south countries, and Ghana is leading a lot of negotiation talks when it comes to youth participation, when it comes to even democracy, because Ghana is indeed a beacon of democracy out there because we've never had issues around election conflicts. We've never had issues around let's say around violence. Let me just put it that way because when we have issues of concern that are bothering young people, we do with so much ease. Not let's say not ease in the form of a simple step, but ease in the form of cooperation and solidarity. The issues around Galamsey that happened a couple of years or months ago before the elections were issues that were affecting us and had a global outlook because of how illegal mining is contributing to poor health, poor education, it's contributing to even climate change as a global agenda. So the youth led demonstrations to take action, even though we can't even see the actions or whatever actions the government is taking immediately. But I think it was a step in the right direction just to call on others because it even influenced the outcome of our elections too as well. So that was successful because it didn't end up in any form of violence. It didn't impede on our justice system. So coming back to the African outlook, talking about Greta Thunberg, right? Greta was able to mobilize millions of young people to fight for climate justice. And that happened in which country? Colombia, yes, Colombia. And these youth-led movements have contributed to peace building efforts. And also through data platforms. I mean, you know that even our Galamsey project or our Galamsey advocacy started as a social media advocacy, which erupted and now became an in-person advocacy where they had to march to some side of 37 military hospital to actually catch the eye of government, which was very much important. Look at the protests that happened amongst young people in Kenya. All of these things were successful because at the end of the day, the interests of young people were kept at the front line. So even though you don't see the impact directly, but it's a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Indeed, it is a step in the right direction. Also, we have a question here. Okay, let me read this one. Someone says, this is a very insightful session. I'd like to rewatch this. Where can I have this recorded? Yes, so the meeting is being recorded. We would share it on YouTube as well. So when it's being shared out, we'll share on our socials for everyone to go and view it there. Okay, there's someone here who's also asking, is it possible to become a diplomat while being affiliated with a political party? And how do I get this information about the diplomatic positions to understand better? Lastly, what really helps make applications stand out to join fellowships? Okay, Mr. Doe, please,
Okay.
you get that, or should I take it again?
I get it. I get it.
Okay.
So with diplomacy and politics, yes, you can have a political stance and still be a diplomat if you know you can work things out with so much objectivity, integrity, and influence without being biased. That is one. But for politics and diplomacy, being a political person who wants to go into diplomacy, the best advice I can give you is to become a political diplomat. Whichever political party you belong to, let them know you are interested in diplomacy so that when the government comes into power and they know that they can entrust an ambassadorial role to you, that is it. But then I'll entreat that when you have an interest in politics, you shouldn't do away with being objective. In a sense that as a young person, develop yourself as a diplomat. In as much as you want to be a political diplomat someday, just develop yourself as a diplomat so that when you are being put into any of these positions, you can act and act properly, right? So with that one, that is one thing on the side of you as an individual. On the part of applications, right? The best applications always have a good story to tell, not just a story of packaged lies, but a story that is relatable, a story that is highly true, a story that when it's being told is expressed as a very authentic story. So you shouldn't lose touch with being authentic and carving your story in a way that is catchy. And also don't forget, impact goes with numbers. If you are telling a story and it's a very catchy story and you don't have numbers attached to it, they can't really scale your impact. And when they can scale your impact, they can now know how influential you are. So when you are having an application or you want to apply for a very good fellowship, you should know what the fellowship stands for. So you have to read about the background of the fellowship. You should know what they are really looking for. And you should now know how to tell your story to fall in line with what they are looking for. So, for example, when I was applying for the Youth Leaders Fellowship with the UNFPA, because of the prior experience I've had with them, I understood the landscape, I understood what they were doing, and I understood what they needed for the fellowship. Yes, they were looking out to develop leaders generally, but they're highly specialized in sexual reproductive health and youth participation, which I have done already. So the story I sold to them was my Legon Ghost Red story, which was really true because I had presented previous reports to them already and they really understood what I was doing and how I was feeding into their work. And I also had to prove to them that when I come in, I'm going to contribute to this and this and this in specific needs, right? So if you read a research about the fellowship and the organization organizing the fellowship, you will be able to tell your story to fit into what they really need. All right. So I think there's a last part I missed. Can you take a question again?
Okay, so the last part is, lastly, what really helps make applications stand out to join
I
fellowship?
I think I just spoke about that, about the storytelling and also researching to know about the
Yeah,
organization and the fellowship. So what's the
okay.
second question,
And I
please?
think the second question is, how do I get this information about the diplomatic positions to understand better?
Oh, okay. So before I can get this information from the Foreign Affairs Ministry, it's not on their website. It's not on their website because I'm actually privy to it because I've engaged the ministry on several occasions and I understand what it is like there. So maybe I might share my social media information. Then maybe you can reach me so that we can have a further discussion on that too as well. So on LinkedIn, my LinkedIn name is Godwin Doe. And the picture here is what I'm using there. So you can just reach me out on LinkedIn, then we'll take a conversation from there too as well. Thank you.
Thank you too. I mean, we've spoken about a lot of highs about being in diplomacy. I would like to hear what are some of the few challenges you've experienced since you entered diplomacy. This is a personal question from me.
Mm. Mm. So, diplomacy is not a one-stop journey. Diplomacy has to do with lifelong learning, and you always have to be reading. And when it comes to challenges, right, young people sometimes are not being treated fairly because they feel tokenism is a thing because they just need the young people to come represent and they'll tell you to ask these specific questions. If you go outside asking different questions, they won't even attend to your questions. That's one thing. So tokenism is a real thing in the world of diplomacy. Just to tick boxes, it's happening. Another challenge is when I was with the UNFPA, right? In the UN system, you don't take gifts because it has a certain threshold. And if you take a gift, you need to go report and account the UN before they can give you an okay as whether you should accept or not. So there was one time I went to Pram Pram to celebrate World AIDS Day. So we went there on a drive to provide them with the information and services. And when we finished, we went to the chief palace, and the chief was offering us some fish, yam, and other things. And in the Ghanaian context, they tell you that when someone gives you a gift, you don't have to reject it. There's some plenty issues. So it took a lot of back and forth in order to reject that because per policy, you're not supposed to be receiving gifts, right? And even currently, I'm also facing another challenge where I'm supposed to attend a 3 weeks fellowship in Egypt. And I'm gainfully employed with a renewable energy firm in Ghana. And just 3 weeks ago, I returned from a trip in Europe. How then do I present this to my boss, telling him that I have to go for another trip? So there's a conflict of interest there, and you might encounter this in different ways. So these are some of the challenges I'm being approached with, I'm facing at the moment regarding my journey in diplomacy.
Thank you so much for sharing. Someone would like to find out how long have you been a diplomat, and is there a particular duration to take before you can call yourself a diplomat?
Oh, okay. So for myself, I'm not a diplomat yet. I'm a budding diplomat because I'm not in the foreign service. If it's diplomacy per the UN system, fine. I can call myself a full-blown diplomat because of the portfolios I've held within the UN system in Ghana. So before I can fully say I am a career diplomat, I need to get into the foreign service. And in Ghana, it's not so easy because sometimes it takes who you know or who knows you to get there. There. But for my journey in diplomacy in the UN system, it took me about 8 9 years because when I was in the university, I had already started my work with them as a UNV volunteer and also as an intern. So I was able to start practice at a very early age. So that is why I've always been harnessing the fact that volunteerism is very important. It's very necessary for your personal and career growth too as well. So if you really want to venture into diplomacy, it's not an overnight journey. It takes a while, and there's no definite time because individuals have their stars aligned in different ways. You might say you want to be a diplomat today, and the next year or two, you're already a diplomat. That's if you get into the foreign service. And if you get into the UN system too, yes, you can get to the UN system in a span of a month and you become a diplomat. So there's not really a stringent time frame to being a diplomat.
Also, we have a question here about how can we effectively identify global issues that require policy-making attention? How can we
So,
effectively identify global issues?
okay, I mean, global issues identification is not a big deal because if you are someone who is conversant with news and reading a lot of current affairs or global affairs, the issues are always there, right? And there's no issue that doesn't require policy or policy making because before you can go into an issue, you need to streamline your efforts to meet the requirements of the issue so that you can solve it. So, I mean, all global issues such as the trade wars we are having today need policy frameworks. They need conflict policy frameworks. We need frameworks in any other thing we are doing when it comes to even the COVID-19 and other pandemics. We need a framework in place so all global policies or all global issues regard global policy because complex issues requires complex approach and policy can somewhat be complex because you take in perspective from diverse individuals or nations to make sure that all your actions are streamlined to meet the targets or the indicators to combat that issue. So I'll just state that all policies or all issues of global concern requires global policy.
Okay, thank you very much. An attendee says, very insightful session, Mr. Godwin. Thank you, Anijie Global Foundation, for this. I've learned a lot. Yes, I think we all can attest to the fact that the session has been very insightful. We've learned a lot about diplomacy and global relations. And as I mentioned earlier, this meeting is being recorded. It will be shared on our YouTube channel, Anijie Global Foundation. Yes, for all of us who would like to watch it again to have the opportunity to do so.
All right, and thank you so much for hosting me. I'm indeed honored, and I look forward to engaging more with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we've exhausted all the questions. So thank you very much, Mr. Godwin. We are really grateful for finding time in your busy schedules to join us for today's masterclass session on global relations and diplomacy. Thank you.
All right, bye.
So I'd like to personally highlight some of the few things he said during today's masterclass. I mean, he mentioned that if you don't identify an issue, you will not be able to address adequately. So as people who like to enter diplomacy and global relations, we need to identify issues in our world. We need to also learn to reach an agreement, negotiate with the bodies involved in solving the problem. Also, some key leadership lessons he mentioned include like management and integrity, and we being strict and stringent on our values. And these are just a few of the things I've learned in today's masterclass. My notes pad is full. I'm really glad I had the opportunity to be in this masterclass, and I think that goes for you too. Yes. So this brings us to the end of our masterclass session. Thank you all for making time to join. Our next masterclass is scheduled for the 28th of May, 2025, which is typically the last Wednesday of May. As you already know, our masterclass sessions come off every last Wednesday of every month. Yes. To stay updated on our upcoming events, please subscribe to the Anijie YouTube channel and follow us on social media, on Instagram, on Twitter, and on Facebook at Anijie Global Foundation. This concludes our session. Thank you very much once again for making time to join. Do have a wonderful evening. Bye.